Merrill Kelly is back with the Arizona Diamondbacks as the 37-year-old right-hander has agreed to a 2-year deal. We'll talk about how important it was to bring back Kelly, and we'll preview the starting rotation, both in the 2026 and the long-term view on this episode of the D-backs Under Review podcast. So everyone, Michael McDermott here, host of the D-backs Under Review podcast. We're going to talk about the starting rotation, starting with Merrill Kelly's return to the Diamondbacks as he has signed a 2-year, $40 million deal. Talk about the Michael Soroka deal. The Diamondbacks have announced that signing and have made a corresponding roster move. In regards to that, we'll look at the Diamondbacks 2026 starting rotation situation, which is now starting to come together. The D-backs now have at least 5 competent starters they can work with, and we'll preview the depth as well. And then we'll take a look at the long-term view and see if in the next 3 years what the farm system could possibly produce as well. So obviously the topic we all want to talk about, Merrill Kelly, has returned on a 2-year, $40 million deal, reported by Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic. So in the case of Kelly, obviously for a pitcher that in the last 5 years has produced 27 or more starts, and 4 of them, only a shoulder injury in 2024 has prevented a 5-year run. I think Kelly might have gotten more money if he was healthier in 2024. But if you're a Diamondbacks fan, you'll take him coming back without breaking the bank. And originally I thought a 2-year, $30 million deal was going to be, I think, a good compromise. Of course, we all know that for a borderline frontline starter, a guy that gives you 30 starts, 180 innings, and a sub-4 ERA every year, Kelly, even if you don't necessarily agree with the underlying metrics, he just does that. You'll take that deal, and Kelly's getting paid like a 3. You'll take that, and you'll take that any day of the week. So, assuming the Diamondbacks are still looking for depth, and now the Diamondbacks can just focus on depth, they can go with a 5-man rotation of Merrill Kelly's the 1, Nelson is your 2, Eduardo Rodriguez is your 3, Brandon Pfaadt is your 4, and then Michael Soroka is your 5. Those are your projected 5 starting pitchers, assuming no more roster moves are made, although, like I said, with Soroka's injury history, depth is necessary. But the big thing is obviously the Diamondbacks are in a situation where they traded 10 starts of Merrill Kelly to the Texas Rangers, got 3 usable pitching prospects. One I think will be very good in 2 years and hitting the majors in 2 years. The one that I've actually talked to in the Arizona Fall League, David Hageman, as well as a plausible rotation candidate in Cole Drake this offseason, and Mitch Bratt, who might be a guy that can pitch above his otherwise meh velocity. So you get the 3 pitching prospects, and you got Merrill Kelly going into 2026. So it's going to be pretty interesting. So Kelly has multiple times stated that he wants to pitch 10 years in Major League Baseball. This deal will push him to 9 years. I'm not sure if there's a club option or if there's any other option that can try and push him to 10, which is an idea that I actually wrote about, and I thought the Diamondbacks should accommodate that request to some degree as long as he's still at least an effective starting pitcher. And we talk about someone that gives you 30 starts, 180 innings, a sub-4 ERA. If Kelly's doing that, then this is a good deal for the Diamondbacks. Even if he doesn't necessarily wow you with velocity, he's hitting below 92 miles an hour on his fastball, but Merrill Kelly's never been a big stuff guy. In his prime, he was averaging 92 miles an hour. And I noticed also that his underlying metrics actually declined a bit after the trade deadline going to Texas. I don't know if that was just necessarily a bad fit or just pitching in an unfamiliar place, and we don't want to necessarily deal with the sample size. But of course, in the case of the Diamondbacks, they know exactly what they're getting out of him. Merrill Kelly has still got an elite chase rate, 32.8% chase rate. That is in the 91st percentile if you go to a StatCast page. He doesn't walk guys. 6.4% walk rate is in the 76th percentile. And he's got usable whiff and strikeout metrics, 41st percentile whiff rate at 24%, strikeout percentage 22.3, right around the MLB average, although it's a little bit less than the median. So as long as, and if Kelly can improve his quality contract metrics to some degree a little bit, I think you're talking about a rotation contract that's going to work out very well in the next 2 years. Obviously, the major concern is Merrill Kelly is going to be entering his age 37 season. He just turned 37 2 months ago. But in the case of the Diamondbacks, a borderline frontline starter for $20 million is still a good deal. especially with the way that he pitched with the team in 2022. 2025. The only concern I have, obviously, is age. But if you look at his 2025 underlying metrics, you'll live with it. Kelly's always done a good job of beating his expected metrics for whatever rhyme or reason, and maybe that's due to the fact that he has a six-pitch arsenal. He's willing to use all those pitches. Certain pitches he'll use more. Like against lefties, he's more cutter, four-seam, changeup. Righties, you'll see more sinkers and sliders in that mix, but Merrill Kelly's best pitch is obviously the changeup. And if you're an aging pitcher, if you can throw a very good changeup, if you throw good secondary stuff, you can get away with throwing 91, 92 with your fastball. And I think also it's an important note for the organization standpoint wise that you keep a guy like Merrill Kelly and reward someone that took I wouldn't say under market because Merrill Kelly was a free agent going into 2019, but did sign an under market extension before the 2022 season. You can argue that Merrill Kelly's second contract is perhaps the biggest, one of the best free agent contracts in Diamondbacks history. Now, of course, they're not going to get a discount on that. At $20 million, the Diamondbacks are expecting Merrill Kelly to be at least a 2-WAR starter. We're going into this offseason. $11 million per WAR is the new standard. You can ask the Dodgers that, as they paid $23 million for basically a 2-WAR closer in Edwin Diaz. So with that in mind, now the Merrill Kelly situation also decreases the possibility Diamondbacks will trade Ketel Marte now that they have at least 5 notable starting pitchers. The depth is a little bit of a concern. They have maybe 1 or 2 prospects that I would be okay with putting in the rotation mix. And we'll talk about that later. But overall, we'll see what happens next. Like I said, Soroka was a case where you didn't want that to be the only starting pitcher deal. If you could bring in another free agent, which they did with Kelly, that would certainly improve the offseason. So let's move on to our second topic since we're on the topic of Soroka. Soroka deal has been made official, announced by the team already. And if you're looking for what Mike Hazen thinks about it, azsnakepit.com does have a somewhat reliable transcript that you can read. You can go there, azsnakepit.com. Look for the Mike Hazen thumbnail. And that will be, I think Jim McLennan has a transcript on there as Hazen talked to the media about the deal. Bryce Jarvis was DFA'd as the corresponding roster move. The Diamondbacks have to make another one with Merrill Kelly. But when we talk about the Jarvis situation, the Diamondbacks pitching pipeline, when you look at the 2019 and 2020 drafts, didn't necessarily pan out. Obviously, Ryan Nelson's a major hit. You're getting, at worst, a number 3 starter with a second-round pick. But the other draft picks the Diamondbacks have had in the top 2 rounds, and I'm talking about that, like Walson's recovering from Tommy John surgery, but doesn't really have much of a ceiling, is more than a 5 starter, maybe a swingman or a reliever. Brendan Malone was traded for Starling Marte. I think that was a situation where the Diamondbacks went for a high-risk, high-upside pick. It didn't work out, and they traded a lottery ticket. Basically, it was a lottery ticket in the Marte deal. And you're okay with that. Dre Jameson has battled injuries himself. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to be. He's a guy with really good velocity and a really good slider and a promising changeup, but it's a situation where you don't know where he's going to be. I think you had to consider his injury history. Maybe you move him into short relief. I consider him a back-end guy if everything clicks. So I still think I would still put Jameson into TBD, whereas I say Walson's unlikely to hit. Nelson's a hit. Brandon Pfaadt, you can consider a hit for a 5th rounder. You get a 4-starter. And Jameson, I would consider a hit if he's a back-end guy. And then you look further, Tommy Henry is a 6 or 7 starter. And unfortunately, he's out of options, but he's no longer on the 40-man roster. So you're okay with in 2027, bring him back in the camp, see what he can do. Although, I don't know if Henry would be eligible for free agency after the 2027 season if he's put on the 60-day IL. There's no 60-man roster. 60-day IL, he's going to get Major League service time. And if he's on the IL for the entire 2026 season, that means he's going to gain a year of service time. But of course, that's only if he's on the 40-man roster. That's why they DFA'd and non-tendered him, so they wouldn't increase the risk that he leaves in minor league free agency after he finishes his Tommy John rehab, which is probably going to be at the tail end of the 2026 season. So with that in mind, it's like Soroka was a good signing. You're going to get him for 15 to 20 starts. You got to backfill the other 13 to 18, and you're hoping maybe your system can backfill that, or Soroka's healthy enough to get you to the trade deadline, your season's going well, and then you fill up the last 10 starts with I guess you can say a more proven guy. You can go for rental situation to replace Soroka if he goes down near the trade deadline. I think it's very difficult for the D-backs to expect him to make 30 starts. He's only done that once in his career, and that was 6 years ago. And he's had a litany of arm injuries between now and then, including biceps injury, which was like a 1 month thing, and then a shoulder problem that came up after he was traded to the Cubs at the trade deadline. So the D-backs have to realistically expect 15 to 20 starts, and they can't expect more. Now, if Soroka gives you more, you'll take it. But realistically, projecting, you got to project somewhere between 80 and 100 innings, and then figure out what to do with the other 100, 120. Well, actually, if you're talking about the 5-star, you're probably projecting 160 innings out of that spot. So 60 to 80 innings. You figure out where to figure that out. Maybe you go with the farm. Christian Mena is an option, although he's coming from off his own shoulder injury that pretty much wiped out 4 months of the season. And then they DFA'd Jarvis, although I never considered Jarvis a rotation option. Dylan Ray is another option. They added him to the 40-man roster in November. But, like I said, I think the Diamondbacks still need to get more rotation depth in their offseason. Maybe they don't go for a big free agent signing. You go for minor league guys. One option, I think they picked up Jose Urquidy. And I'm not sure. That was announced last night. And when I say last night, I mean Saturday night. And that was reported. I don't think that's been announced by the team yet, but Urquidy is kind of in that same situation as Soroka. It's a litany of arm injuries since the last time he was an effective starting pitcher, and has bounced from the Astros and the Tigers. So we'll move on ahead to the Diamondbacks' 2026 rotation situation. So we've already kind of talked about that to some degree. Merrill Kelly's your 1. Your number 2 is Nelson. Your number 3 is Rodriguez. Your number 4 is Brandon Pfaadt. And your number 5 is Soroka. And you're hoping the system can fill in. Because realistically, you can't expect... Well, I guess you can expect Brandon Pfaadt and Ryan Nelson to give you 150 innings because they've done that the last 2 years. We're just talking about Rodriguez. Rodriguez kind of has an odd even year thing with innings. Although we can't really ding him for 2022 because he left the team to address the family situation while he was pitching in his first year with the Tigers. I'm not sure what was going on there. Well, that seems to resolve itself. I think if you look at the innings for Rodriguez, and the number of innings he pitches in 2026 is going to matter, aside from the fact of the actual results. But Rodriguez's 2028 vesting option is going to be dependent on the number of innings he throws in the next 2 seasons. And kind of the downside with Rodriguez is you look at from 2019 onward. So 2019, 203 innings. 2020 did not play because of COVID. 2021, 157 innings and 31 starts. 2022, 91 starts. As I said, he left the team for a couple months. He only made 17 starts. 2023 made 26 starts, 152 innings. That's why the Diamondbacks signed him. 2024 had that shoulder injury. The Diamondbacks kind of... I don't want to accuse him of doing it, but they certainly could have done a better job of handling it. A bit misdiagnosing anything. Only 50 innings and 10 starts. Season pretty much erased by injuries. 2025, 29 starts, 154 innings. Again, the Diamondbacks are basically paying Rodriguez to provide that many starts in innings. So if you get that, you'll take it, although you'd certainly want better quality of innings. If you look at Rodriguez's Diamondbacks tenure, he's got a 4.57 FIP, so we're talking strikeouts, walks, and home runs, a 1.53 WHIP, and 10.3 hits per 9 innings. You certainly weren't expecting that. The walk rate is up compared to his career. He's 3.1 walks per 9. Last 2 seasons, he's 3.5. Of course, if you know me, I hate per 9 stats. So let's talk about ratios here. So 8% walk rate. The walk rate actually isn't that much higher than his career. 8.2 career versus 8.5 as a Diamondback. It's kind of one concern. Eduardo Rodriguez's situation is one they're going to have to figure out, especially since the last 2 seasons he's had an ERA over 5. But looking at the underlying metrics, as I pulled up on Baseball Savant, Yeah, the underlying metrics aren't necessarily great. Expected ERA 4.52, expected average 2.61. Barrel rate's 8.2, which is right around the league median. I think the main thing is Rodriguez is a soft contact pitcher, which does show up a little bit in his average exit velocity and hard hit rate. His hard hit rate is only 35%, which is in the 87th percentile. However, if you're giving up a lot of air contact and Rodriguez's ground ball rate's below 39%, even soft hit balls become hits. Or as I like to call it, the Luis Arraez base hit. An 88-mile-an-hour line drive with a 10 to 15-degree launch angle is a single 90% of the time. I'm not sure what the actual expected batting average for such a bad ball is. And then beyond Rodriguez, the Diamondbacks need to get more out of both Nelson and Pfaadt, especially Pfaadt. It's a situation where the Diamondbacks just, for whatever reason for Brandon Pfaadt, he just doesn't pitch to his ceiling, and I think it's the fact he has no breaking ball feel, even with good breaking ball stuff. And you look at Pfaadt, it's 2025 metrics, minus 15 run value in pitching, and that's because his breaking ball is minus 19. That's pretty bad, considering that he throws 2 breaking balls, and both are significant negatives. You look at the run values pitch, sweeper minus 9, and the curveball is minus 10. And the curveball is even worse on a per 100 basis. It's minus 3.3. It's a situation where I think Brandon Pfaadt needs to reconsider where he's supposed to throw these pitches. I think you have to look at his breaking stuff gets a lot of swing and miss. The whiff rate on his sweeper is 33%. The curveball is 36%. Maybe those shouldn't be pitches he throws in the strike zone, especially considering Brandon Pfaadt's more of a strike thrower than a command guy. And we're seeing the downside to that. I think Pfaadt needs to... I'm not sure what his zone rating is. Look. So again, Pfaadt throws, I dare I say, too many strikes. Especially with the secondary stuff. Because Pfaadt's pretty much a old school type pitcher. Established the fastball, 3 different fastballs. That combines for about 55% usage. Although I expect the cutter usage to be up in 2026 because that's a pitch he didn't really start throwing for real until about halfway through the 2025 season. The cutter I thought had some pretty good promise to it. And you look at the run values. The sinker was +3 and the cutter's +5. I think, like I said, use the 4-seamer, the sweeper, and the curveball for put-away pitches. Finish off the hitter. You're pitching to the edge of the strike zone and out. Or the common vernacular that you hear from coaches is strike to ball. You're not trying to. You're trying to hit the top one. In the case of the 4-seamer, you're trying to hit the top line of the strike zone. You're trying to pepper that top line. Whereas you look at the curveball, you want to hit the bottom line and below. And in the sweeper, you want glove side line of the strike zone in that way. And maybe the changeup as well, and you go in that direction. Like, Pfaadt has a pretty deep arsenal of pitches. And you can go this way with the 4-seamer, this way with the curveball, this way with the sweeper, and that way with the changeup and sinker. And that's something I wrote on back in July. Pfaadt has... It's a situation where the execution hasn't caught up to the stuff. As you look at the chase rate, Pfaadt's at 30.3% chase rate, which is in the 74th percentile. I think Pfaadt needs to lean more on getting more chases and whiffs because his quality of contact metrics, his swing and miss isn't very good. I think he's going to have to do a better job of, in his words, evacuate the strike zone. Especially considering his 4-seam fastball is only 93. 93.6, I should say. So you got below average fastball. I'm not sure what will look like. It's one of those things where I think Pfaadt could have a Mitch Keller type. I think Brandon Pfaadt could have a Mitch Keller type career. If you look at Keller, we'll pull up Keller on baseball reference. I remember Keller being a guy that struggled for like 3 seasons and then he kind of figured it out in year 4. Yep, that is indeed the case. So you look at Mitch Keller. Look at 19 was bad, 7.13 ERA, 19 in 2021. He had a 6.17 ERA despite a 4.30 FIP. 2022, he kind of, like I said, figured it out a little bit. Despite a terrible record, that says more about the team than him. 3.91 ERA and 159 innings. Maybe Brandon Pfaadt has that. You don't necessarily worry about the quality of worry about innings with Pfaadt. Brandon Pfaadt has not missed a start in his career yet. If you look at since his debut, since his 7th, he's made 6 starts while being an up and down pitcher. You subtract those 6 starts, 6 games, he's basically made, you can add 33, 32, that's 65, plus 13. He's made 78 straight starts. And I know one of those appearances was a 6-inning relief appearance. I'm considering that a start. Even if he ended the game instead of started it. So, like I said, quality contract metrics I think is where Brandon Pfaadt's going to have to improve in 2026. If he does that, Diamondbacks will get a huge boost in their rotation if Brandon Pfaadt can be better than a 5 ERA pitcher. And like I said, Mitch Keller I think is the appropriate comparison. And I think I'll take Brandon Pfaadt's 2024 underlying metrics and maybe the run prevention catches up to that. Like 2024 Pfaadt. If that's the standard moving forward, I think, like I said, the Diamondbacks will get plenty out of that extension. That's why they gave him that extension. Unfortunately, when you look back on that, it was kind of a shame that things didn't work out in 2025. And then Nelson, obviously, I think Nelson's the guy that determines the ceiling of this rotation. He's kind of on that threshold. He's kind of sort of almost a frontline starter because he's got a plus fast 4-seam fastball. 96 with almost 20 inches of induced vertical break. That's a very rare fastball indeed. And I believe if you look at the numbers, Dylan Cease had the most fastballs that were 96 miles an hour with 20 inches of induced vertical break, and that's why he gets $210 million. Of course, if Nelson's got 3 years of control left, and one thing in 2026, he's improved his barrel rate. In 2025, he's improved his barrel rate. The strikeouts are up to 21.3. I'm hoping that number continues to climb. The chase rate is up as well. I think that's development of the slider. The slider has turned into a weapon for Nelson because the whiff rate on the slider is now 33% and the put away is over 20%. So it's turning into a strikeout pitch for him, especially since Nelson can establish the 4-seamer at the top. Nelson does have the command to pepper the top of the strike zone with 4-seam fastballs. That's why he gets such a low barrel rate despite a high exit velocity metric, because the 91-mile-an-hour fly ball is an out in the major leagues. 99.9999% of the time. I've seen an 89-mile-an-hour fly ball leave the ballpark, but we can blame the wind for that one. So Nelson has a big force. So Nelson's 4-seam fastball carries it, plus 23 run value on his fastball, all of it on the 4-seamer, and that's because he throws it a lot. I think it's a situation, if he can develop, I think it's a situation where he doesn't have necessarily lefty neutralizing pitches. Like the 4-seam slider combination, the 4-seamer is not necessarily a platoon heavy pitch. The slider is a platoon heavy towards same-handed hitters. You look at his lefty neutralizing thing, the cutter was 0 run value, slight positive if you go by per 100, 0.1. The curveball was minus 1.2, and that's, I think, a pitch he's going to have to... That's a pitch you hope Nelson figures out. Unless he has better slider command. I think with the slider, if he can command the back foot on the slider, I don't necessarily think he needs a curveball, but the curveball is something he can throw strike the ball down if you want a more depthy pitch. Although Nelson's slider certainly is depthier than your typical slider. If you look at his Baseball Savant page, you look at the total movement, gets 1.3 more inches of vertical drop on his slider than the average 86-mile-an-hour slider. That has a spin rate of around 2,400. So again, with Nelson, it's figuring out lefty neutralizing pitch because the slider is a swing and miss pitch to righties. You can look up his whiff rate on the slider against right-hand hitters on Baseball Savant search. So again, it's like figuring out, I think, better cutter command, figuring out the curveball. Like, I think Nelson doesn't necessarily need a changeup if he can throw the cutter to the back door. Maybe he can pick up some tips from Merrill Kelly. Like I said, Merrill Kelly Although Merrill Kelly's mechanics are more conducive to throwing a good changeup than Nelson's, in my opinion. But I digress. But so like I said, so getting more out of Erod, Fott, and Nelson's going to be what makes the starting rotation work. And then they're going to get Corbin Burns back around the All-Star break. I don't know where he is in his rehab. I'm not going to... The All-Star break, I think, is a very good conservative estimate because that'd be 13 months post-surgery. And it sounds like Corbin Burns is ahead of schedule, although you got to be careful. You got $140 million left to pay out after the 2026 season. Of course, obviously, when the Diamondbacks made that sign, they were expecting Corbin Burns to pitch great for 2 years and then leave. But because of the Tommy John surgery, he's going to be here for the full 6 years. That's a question. And then if the Diamondbacks can stay afloat, Corbin Burns can be as good post-surgery as he was pre-surgery, I think you have something. But I would still say if the Diamondbacks are still alive in July, I think you still make a starting pitcher trade. But you're more comfortable taking on a rental. So let's move on to our fourth and final topic. We will look at the farm system. And we'll start with the 2026 guys. So the Diamondbacks, of course, if you look at depth, you look at the offseason, they added Cole Drake, Mitch Bratt, and Dylan Ray. Drake and Bratt came from the Merrill Kelly deal, which is now we can talk about that a lot better because Merrill Kelly's back. It's one of those situations where it's like, yeah, we got prospects and we got Kelly. Everyone wins. So then you look at the farm system and look at 2026, your ETAs, like I said, Drake, Bratt, Ray. I think then you got Spencer G-Sting as a possible call candidate. Yumin Lin will be a decision that the team may or may not make. Although it's a situation, because the number of arms that they have, I guess the number of arms that you could use development, I don't know how many of them would be future rotation upside guys. You try to get them as many innings and reps as possible. So looking at the Reno rotation, you have, Dylan Ray, you have Cole Drake, you got Mitch Bratt, Yumin Lin, Spencer G-Sting, that's your starting five in Reno. Then in Double A, you got Daniel Egan knocking on the door. Jose Cabrera will probably repeat because there's just no room for him in Reno. And then you possibly look at David Hageman. I think he's going to start the year in Hillsborough, probably in Amarillo by mid-season. Hageman had a very strong finish to the year. Kind of iffy in the fall league, he'll tell you. He's told me before that he hasn't necessarily done his best out there, and you can go find those clips on the YouTube channel. We'll do a quick CTA before we move on. We'll continue this topic. So again, if you're looking for that stuff and you enjoy that stuff, we'll try to do it again if this channel gets anywhere. We'll look at it. So again, the math doesn't math. 82.5 plus 18 is over 100. I don't know how YouTube came up to these numbers. But again, 82.5% not subscribed to the channel. Let's fix that. We want to have the number of subscribed viewers be at the same rate of Ryan Nelson's forcing fastball usage, 61.7%. So anyway, going back to Hageman. Hageman, I think, is the Diamondbacks' best pitching prospect in terms of upside right now. That's in full season ball, which may or may not be a thing because I have Hageman as a 3. Number 3 star, maybe, with more velocity is a 2. We'll see where that looks. I probably won't be able to check the velocity thing without, I guess, insider sources. I don't think that'll be a thing. But, so we talk about Hageman. It's going to be a midseason in Amarillo. Then you look kind of further down. Dari Vasquez, I think, is the most interesting arm they have in low A. Like I said, Diamondbacks don't necessarily have a lot of velocity in their farm system. They're trying to change that. They picked up Patrick Forbes, who's mid to upper 90s. It'd be interesting to see what he does with his stuff. I think he's like a 4-seamer that's 93 to 96 and can get up to 100. A gyro slide, which is like a short slide with not much horizontal break. And then a changeup. I think it's a situation where Forbes is a high risk, high reward type starting pitcher if they can get kind of like how they did with Landon Sims a few years back, although Sims was a case where his stuff never recovered from surgery. We talk about Forbes. Forbes is kind of that same upside play the Diamondbacks did with Sims. Sims was drafted right around the same thing. Sims was 34 in 2022. Forbes 29 in 2025. And you look at Brian Curley. Curley's probably a reliever. Although there may be a reliever with Johnny Cueto like flair. It's like you don't want base runners against Brian Curley's. Otherwise, he won't be able to do his antics. But Curley's an upside play in the third round last year, in the last draft. The Diamondbacks are looking to add more stuff to their system. If you have a Baseball America subscription, you know exactly why. It's like the Diamondbacks and the stuff. The Diamondbacks have some of the worst, I guess you can say, fastball velocity in the minor leagues, and that's something they're trying to change. And that's also why they also went into the Pirates organization, rated them, picked up Jeremy Bleich, who was part of the Pirates pitching development system. And if you look at the Pirates system, they have a lot of pitchers. They have more pitchers than they have spots, starting pitchers. So obviously, Paul Skeens is probably going to get traded soon because the Pirates can't afford. One, the Pirates probably can't afford him, and two, they can't seem to build a team around him. You got Bubba Chandler, who's in the conversation for best pitching prospect in the minor leagues going into 2026. Mitch Keller, I think they're going to move Keller. If I'm the Pirates, I dangle Mitch Keller for offensive help. And they have Braxton Ash, and they got some upside arms in Braxton Ashcraft, Mike Burrows, Hunter Barco. And then who knows what happened with Jared Jones, although I wonder with Jared Jones' injury history, you make him a closer in Pittsburgh, and you say, okay, he's got good stuff, but he can't throw 120 innings. Let's make him throw 60 to 65. That's typically what happens with most pitchers. Like, most relievers are converted stars that just, for one reason or another, they either don't have the best stuff, they can't consistently execute stuff, or they just can't hold up for the starting pitcher workload. Those are the two primary reasons why a guy will move from rotation to bullpen. But I think I'm getting moved off the point. So, like I said, the three biggest arms. You look at farm system wise: Daniel Egan, David Hageman, and Cole Drake. And then you can argue Dari Vasquez and Visalia. And you can also have Patrick Forbes as well in Hillsborough in 2026, and that's going to be something to monitor. But if you talk rotation upside, the first three names, those are the only three safe rotation grades that I have. I have Daniel Egan as a 50 future value prospect. I'm pretty sure that Fangraphs will disagree with me on that. I have David Hageman as a 45 plus. I think Fangraphs will agree with me on that. And then I have Cole Drake as a 45, no plus in that situation. Of course, a 45 is a 5 starter. If you read, I should probably release my rankings, release my grades, so everyone can follow along. It's like those are the three safe rotation projections that I have, to be determined on a few other arms and what they do in the draft. But it's a situation where the Diamondbacks need to improve their pitching pipeline because they don't have the financial resources to just sign whoever they want like the Dodgers can, or what the Giants can do, and the Giants aren't that far away from there either. You're not going to be able to compete from a spending standpoint with the Dodgers and the Giants, so you have to, every dollar counts more. And the easiest way to get talent for less money is having a strong farm system, having a strong pitching, hitting pipeline, and having a better hit rate on your prospects than the average team. And that's kind of a situation where we talk about the 19 and 20 drafts, a hit rate of 1 out. It will include 5, so we'll do 8. Between the 2019 draft and the top 2 rounds, plus the 5-pick draft in 2020, the Diamondbacks drafted 9 pitchers, hit on 1, to be determined on another. I'm sorry, hit on 2. I'm going to count as a hit. 5th rounder turns into any starting rotation option, that's a hit. So 2 hits, to be determined on a 3rd, and 2 disappointing picks. And then the rest just didn't do. The rest would be considered busts. Although I guess you could say a bust is not hitting the major leagues at all. The 2 picks that didn't turn out to be much in value. So, as I said, the Diamondbacks' inability to turn those arms into capable arms is, I guess you could say, the reason why they couldn't build on that 2023 season, which now looks more like a fluke 2 years after the fact. Even though they did improve their win total in 2024, and then they just fell on their faces in 2025. Like just one badly timed losing streak, pretty much, plus a lot of, I guess you can say, underlying cracks in the foundation that started mid-April undid that 2025 season. They looked good at the start, and then they just couldn't sustain it or stay healthy. And that's kind of the eulogy of that last season. But improving the pitching pipeline has to be the Diamondbacks' number one goal as an organization if they want to compete for the division title ever again. Because they're going to be outspent 2-1 the rest of the way under the current system that Major League Baseball allows. There really isn't much of a deterrent to stop the Dodgers from spending $400 million to win a World Series title every year. And that's going to be something that's, I think the economics of baseball has to be addressed in the next CBA, and maybe that's why we'll see a work stoppage, a long, protracted fight, maybe something you take short-term pain for long-term gain and make the sport more interesting as a result. But I don't know if the sport will also recover from another lockout situation. But that's just my opinion. We'll talk about that when we get closer to that. So again, thanks everyone for listening in. I probably talked too much about this. We're over 35 minutes here. If you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to subscribe, leave a like on the video, turn on bells for notifications. That way, the next episode that comes out, you get a notification from YouTube when they get around to that. And again, only 82% of our watch time is from subscribers. Let's get that total up to Ryan Nelson's fastball usage. Let's get the subscribe number from 18% to 61%. That'd be a huge number. And again, if you do those things, YouTube will push these videos out there. More people get to listen to it, and then we'll work. It's a more encouraging thing moving forward. So, once again, I'm Mike McDermott. I'm signing off here until the next episode.